Find a pen and fill the paper with the message that it wants to send.
Hello and welcome to the Aviatrix Book Review Writers Room. I'm Liz Booker. Today's workshop discussion will be facilitated by lawyer and literary agent Dr. Jacqueline Lipton. Jackie's extensive CV includes many academic texts and articles about legal issues in the digital age. She has taught at leading law schools in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Her academic and professional work have focused on law in the digital age, with an emphasis on copyright, trademark, privacy, business, and contract law. She holds multiple law degrees, including 2 PhDs, one from Griffith University in Brisbane, Australia, and one from Cambridge University in the UK. She also earned her Master of Fine Arts in Fiction Writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts as my classmate. She writes fiction under the pen name K.C. McGuire. She is the director of Autobiography, LLC, a company dedicated to helping authors and others meet their writing and professional goals, and the founder of Raven Quill Literary Agency, specializing in children's literature. She teaches online courses on fiction writing and a variety of legal issues of particular note for us today. She has published the book, Law and Authors, a legal handbook for writers, which will be the focus of the first half of today's discussion. And in the second half, I hope that she will share her insights as a literary agent. I am very grateful to Jackie for taking the time to share her expertise with us today. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And before I hand things over to you, if I could have everyone else on the call just introduce yourselves briefly. We'll start with Robin.
Hi, everyone. Everyone here knows me, and I was talking with Jackie Little, so I'll keep it brief. I'm Robin Cardin. I write as R.D. Cardin. After careers as an attorney, professional pilot, and consultant, I become an author. I write about issues at work involving female pilots. My series is the Fly Girl series. First 2 books, Fly Girl and Angel Flight, are out. And I am writing, I took a break from writing book 3 of the series to attend this call. Hi, everyone.
Thanks for being here, Robin. And Sid, we'll go to you next.
Hi, I'm Sid Blue. I have 2 books that are out that are read in middle schools, like 6th to 8th grade. One is Fly Girl, and the other is called Circle, and I'm working on converting those to movies. The scripts are in development, and I'm working with some awesome producers. And flying. I'm a commercial pilot. I had an aerial surveillance company for about 8 years. I flew from California to Texas, low level, doing that work, and then stopped when I was getting too busy with speaking at schools and wanting to help kids. And I've branched out in that direction now. Thank you.
Awesome, Sid. Thank you so much for being here. Sarah, how about you?
Hi, I'm Sarah Bate. I've self-published 5 books, mostly for younger children. My last book, my 5th book, was my first novel. The other ones were children's picture books. And I'm a AW-139 instructor, helicopter pilot. That's my aviation background. And that's it. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you, Sarah. Thank you. And Christy.
Hi, I'm Christy Feinsig. I'm in the Boston area, and I'm a student pilot. I'm also an unpublished writer. I recently finished a master's in archaeology and wrote a long thesis for that, and I really enjoyed the whole writing process. So I wanted to continue, maybe do some articles, maybe a novel. We'll see. And it's been great to meet with everyone in this group.
Thank you for being here, Christy. And I'm Liz Booker. I am a retired Coast Guard helicopter pilot, and I am writing fiction for young adults that features girls who learn how to fly. And I sure hope to be ready for an agent sometime this year. Okay, Jackie, off to you.
Hi, this is just so exciting because everyone's backgrounds are so high powered, and I'm kind of like, well, what do I say to this group. You know, I do a lot of webinars about legal issues for authors, but it's often like to a group where everyone's kind of at the same place in the publishing journey. So like a group who are all looking for an agent and they're worried about agent contracts, or they're worried about someone stealing their ideas. So, you know, so I don't know sort of what is the most useful way to jump in. I mean, the book itself, and if anyone wants to purchase a copy at a discount, I have if you get it from University of California Press, they have a 30% discount, and I can tell you how to do that. But it basically, I broke it down into a lot of chapters on copyrights and contracting, you know, because those are the main things you do as an author, right? You have to understand what rights you own in your work, and then you contract with them, with a publisher. So I talk a lot about that. I talk a lot about copyright infringement, how to be careful about your work being infringed, and how to avoid infringing other people's copyrights. And then I do talk a little bit about self-publishing. I talk about trademarks and author brands, all the defamation and privacy stuff, writing about real people. And then I talk a little bit also about marketing and social media and what you put on your websites. And I don't know what's sort of the most useful, because there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about. We were talking right before we started formally recording this about memoir and writing about real people. And obviously all of you are, to an extent, drawing from your own experiences in your work. But are there any kind of requests? Are there any?
Robin has her hand up.
I actually do have a request. One of the things that's always on my mind, and they're related, is someone stealing my idea. And I noticed that so many writers are circumspect when they talk about what they're writing about, their works in progress. And related to that, I believe, is piracy. Releasing, which I don't do anymore, unprotected digital copies of your work and finding them on pirate sites.
Yeah, I can certainly start there. Actually, I might take those in reverse order, because I was literally just dealing with a piracy situation with one of my clients' work. You'd be aware that there are, apart from anything else, pirate websites, you know, websites that pop up all over the place. And when they find that a book is popular, they get a PDF of it and, you know, make it available for free or whatever their followers will pay for it. And yeah, I mean, so it's copyright infringement. And an interesting conversation I had with the particular publisher, who is the publisher of this one book of a client's that we found being pirated, they said that with their books, and this was a fairly small publisher too, so I assume it holds true also for like Penguin Random House, they said that they don't think that affects their bottom lines that much. They think that there is an awareness that this goes on, and that there's much more awareness in the digital age with all of the Twitter stuff about supporting authors and supporting, you know, in order for authors to get paid, you actually have to buy their books. And it was surprising to me, because although the publishers do periodically team up and attack these piracy websites, because obviously legally they have to remove the content, it seems that the bottom line financially, and we're talking about a book that's actually been doing very well, the publisher said, yeah, we'll send them a takedown notice. They'll pop up somewhere else and do the same thing again. But it doesn't seem to affect the sales. That said, the legal position in the United States, which is why a lot of these places don't pop up in the United States, although the law is similar in the EU, if you do that, if you promote or sell or make available a pirated copy of someone's book on your website, the legal presumption is that if the copyright owner tells you to take it down, if you don't take it down, you're also liable for copyright infringement. So that liability attaches if you don't take it down. That's Section 512 of the Copyright Act in the US. That's why Amazon acts very quickly. And a lot of self-published authors have this problem, that if someone says, oh, that copied something I did, Amazon will default to taking it down. And you have to prove that, in fact, no, you weren't copying someone else's work to put it up again. So there's all, the law creates all these kind of weird, perverse incentives. But interestingly, I do tend to buy that it maybe doesn't horribly impact finances. I think early on it did. At the dawn of the digital age, there were a lot of horror stories about authors who couldn't make money because people were pirating their work. But now with the digital watermarks, as you mentioned, now it's more the other problem. It's the problem that stuff gets taken down that really isn't copyright infringing, which is interesting, I think.
It's interesting.
The other part of your question about protecting ideas, you know, one reason some authors are circumspect about sharing ideas is that occasionally, if it's like a second book, or if you have a 2-book deal or an option book, often there's a confidentiality clause. Often you can't contractually talk about the next project, which is not what you're talking about. You're talking about the situation when people are scared of someone stealing their idea. The weirdest thing is that it really doesn't happen as much as people assume it does. And copyright only protects the expression of the idea, not the idea itself. So what's the chances that even if your idea was very similar, you'd execute it?
And that's what I always say. I mean, at the end of the day, no one is going to put the same 80,000 words together the way you are. Those,
that's right.
In the order in which you put them together. And as a fiction writer, someone writing adult fiction and reading adult fiction, in my humble opinion, we're all telling the same exact story again and again and again and again.
I can tell you from where I sit, I see basically the same stories come across my inbox over and over again from people who could never possibly have met each other. I was about to go out on submission with a picture book recently, and I always do a comparative title search right before I do that. And I worked with this author on the piece. She's been working on it for 6 years. I know that that's what she's been doing. And when I did my comp title search, I found almost the identical book that had been published 3 years ago by a smaller publisher. So we'd missed it, but it won some awards and it did very well. And I'm like, CRAP, we can't submit this right now. And that's not even a copyright problem, right? It's just how it's basically the same book. It's an important idea. It's a grief picture book. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Obviously, people are writing those, but it's just the focal point of the book is just too similar, and the editors are going to say, "Well, there's this book, so why do we need it?" So it's not that it would be a copyright infringement. It's just that no one would. So that's another problem. That's not illegal.
It's not commercially viable.
It's not commercially viable right now, and that's not a legal problem. That's a market reality. I can't sell it as it is. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of nuances to this idea expression dichotomy where copyright protects the expression but not the idea. That the things that are problematic in the market tend not to be the legal issues. It tends to be if someone accuses someone else of plagiarism. That's much worse than a threat of a copyright infringement action, because a copyright law doesn't assign a state of mind, an intent to the defendant. So everyone knows copyright is just copying. Plagiarism has this bad faith ethical connotation to it. Now, we don't have a law against plagiarism in the US with respect to literary works. So what publishers will pull books off the shelf if there's a hint of plagiarism, which is where the idea is similar, but there's been no attribution. But, you know, copyright, it takes years to litigate a copyright infringement, and it doesn't convey that same sense of unethical conduct. It's just the act of copying. So and I talk about that in the book. I say it's so weird because whenever people are talking about copyright, half the time they're really talking about plagiarism. Half the time they're really talking about stealing ideas without attribution, and there's no law against that in this country with respect to literary works. And, you know, there's always someone in the audience who says, yes, but there's the Visual Artists' Rights Act. And yes, there is the Visual Artists' Rights Act that protects works of art and architecture, not literary works. So it doesn't help us at all. So,
Thank you.
anything else on people's minds? Because I don't want to just talk. I don't want to just go, let me tell you all about.
Well, Sid, I feel like Sid, didn't you make a comment at some point about this digital piracy issue? Was that you?
Yeah, I had to take my books down from Kindle because someone did copy it and distribute it. And that sucked because there's nothing you can do once it's out.
Yeah.
So that's why my books are only in paperback form now. And I don't know what I'm going to do in the future, but yeah, that's no fun.
How does that help? Because if you're worried about copyright piracy, couldn't someone buy the hard copy and make a PDF of it and pirate it that way anyway?
Do you mean scanning in each page?
Yeah.
Well, I guess they're too lazy in the first place.
So how did the digital one get copied?
I don't know. I just found it one day, and I had the book on Kindle and no other electronic means other than Kindle.
Wow.
So I found it in several places and couldn't do anything about it. But I did have a question. You write with a pseudonym, but then like on your Amazon page, you put your real name. So
Yeah.
is there any benefit to having a pseudonym?
I kind of killed the pseudonym in the last couple of years. I used it when I was being a much more serious law professor than I am now. And I still write legal textbooks. And, you know, so when my students were going to get a textbook on Amazon, I didn't want them to find some, you know, I used to write little romance novellas and stuff, which are no longer available because the publisher decided they were so bad and whatever. So that's why I did it originally. So I never really did hide the fact that it was me. I just didn't want it to be the first search results if colleagues or students were looking for my textbooks. Now I sort of, I mean, I guess I haven't written fiction for a while. I was saying I'm working on a memoir, which who knows if it'll ever see the light of day, but obviously it's a memoir, so I'll publish it under my name. So yeah, I mean, people do use pen names for all sorts of reasons.
So if you wanted to not be found, like for example, J.K. Rowling sent out one of her books after the Harry Potter series under a pseudonym to see if it would be picked up as easily. I believe it wasn't, and then she had to reveal her name.
Well, that's not what happened. It slipped. One of her lawyers accidentally let it slip, and then it was picked up. So she didn't really get to test it out. But yes, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Okay, so my question is, can you actually keep your identity hidden?
Yeah, I have a client who does that. In fact, I have a couple of them, they're just using their maiden name. One of them uses a complete pseudonym and no one knows it's her. And even sometimes within the agency, when we do Zoom calls, she doesn't use her real name. So the contracts just say her real name, writing as pen name.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Because legally that person doesn't exist. So legally you have to contract in your name, but yeah, it's not hard.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Any other searching questions? Because I do have a 40 slide deck I can threaten you with. The main reason is because I wanted to like demonstrate work for hire covers and derivative works. Sometimes I do very long versions of a legal presentation, and I do that. But
I have one more question. I saw that you did a book on domains and domain names. So is it necessary to buy every rendition, like for the Aviatrix book review? Do you need to buy every single domain you can think of, like Aviator book review and Aviator books review? And
Thank you, Sid.
Yes, it depends on why you're doing it. I mean, back in the day when I was researching in the area, I talked to a lot of, company directors about their trademarks and protecting them in domain names. And some companies will do that, as you know, and that you see every variation of their name. Many big companies say, look, we just want the trademark.com version. If anyone else uses a similar name, if they're doing it in a way that harms us, we'll sue them. And if they're not, we don't care. So I think now with like sophisticated SEO, with the search engine optimization, you don't need to have every iteration of your name. You just need to make sure that people can find you, that your name is prioritized in search results. I mean, my agency is Raven Quill Literary Agency, and I can't tell you how many Raven something or Quill something publishing company, little publishing companies and whatever. So we have some iterations of the name. I'm not registering it as a trademark for that exact reason, that if I tried to register it as a registered mark, a lot of people would have a problem with it. But if a bunch of non-registered trademarks just have similar marks, and we each have similar domain names, and we're not interfering with each other's business, it's just not a big deal.
Okay, yeah, because it can get quite expensive buying up 20. You're paying for 20 different domain names that are the same.
There's no need. You just have to watch out, like if someone is trying to, I mean, I can't imagine what anyone would do to the Aviatrix group. I can imagine that people would try and sell, like the speculators would try and register, once they see you've got like aviatrix.com or something, they'll register the net org, and then they'll say, come to us and we'll sell you this for $1,000. And there's really, I mean, yeah, there is a legal action you can take. There are arbitration proceedings you can take. But do you really need the names? They're not hurting you. They're just sitting there saying, hey, we have this name if you want to buy it. And if you don't want to buy it and no one else can buy it, then what does it matter?
As long as people don't get confused and go to their website instead of ours.
Right. So if that's happening, that's when you might want to you can do a UDRP arbitration. Then that's the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers has a arbitration proceeding that costs like $1,000. It's all online. And if someone has abusively registered or used a name to stop people from getting eyeballs to your website, you can do that, which is much quicker and cheaper than trademark litigation. And that's why it was set up. And I talk about that in the book as well, but that's what I did my PhD thesis on, that whole domain name stuff. So I'm a complete nerd about it. And, that's what most people do. You can just sort of do that and very quickly resolve the issue, even if the person isn't in America, because that's the other problem with litigation. If the other person is a speculator in Italy or something, the arbitration is much easier because it's online and it's global.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Well, if nobody else has a question right now, maybe we can spark some conversation. So, so Jackie, you were talking about that you're sort of immersing yourself in memoir right now. And our last workshop was the question of whether to use our flying experience in fiction or memoir. And we appear to have, well, I don't know where Christy's going to go with her writing, but the rest of us all seem to be using our experiences in fiction. But for those who might come to this with questions about, and I know that you talk about some of this using real people in your writing, maybe you can talk just a little bit about the considerations. You were just giving us sort of the parallel in the legal industry to what we experience as the minority, as women in aviation, and how you might approach that. So how are you thinking about that? If you were to write a memoir, how would you share those maybe off-putting or uncomfortable experiences that would demonstrate the sort of biases or exclusion that you felt without crossing any legal boundaries?
Yeah, I think we're pretty lucky in the US in the sense that the defamation law here is pretty weak. You know, it's pretty hard for a plaintiff to bring a successful defamation action. And, you know, a lot of that is because of the First Amendment. That's, you know, that situation is very different in other countries. Like in Australia, political figures successfully bring defamation actions all the time. There's no First Amendment equivalent. In the European Union countries and in the European countries generally under the European Convention on Human Rights, the right to speak freely is balanced against rights to privacy and protection of reputation. So defamation is law that works differently in different countries, and we're pretty lucky in the US. So if you're publishing in the North American market, you're much safer and you can get away with a lot more than if you're publishing in some of those foreign markets. And what you'll often see with things like memoir or fiction very closely based on real life, different editions, different versions in different countries. And, you know, I think I mentioned in my own book stories of where there's been like, you know, 127 deletions of a book in the UK market and only 80 things deleted by the editors in the US or something like that. So in order to defame someone, you have to publish a false statement about an identifiable person that is likely to harm their reputation. So it's really those three elements. False statement about identifiable person that would harm their reputation, would bring them into disrepute. And then we have all of that stuff about public figures, that public figures get less protection because it's in the interests of the public to know stuff about them. So if a public figure is suing, and that includes like celebrities and sports stars and that sort of thing, for them to successfully bring an action, they have to establish a standard that's called actual malice. You know, which means you knew what you were doing. You knew that you were publishing something false about them. So, you know, on the one hand, we're really lucky legally. On the other hand, we all live in this world, and Robin was talking about this before the recording started. And you do have to sort of figure out what your bottom line is in terms, as a writing, publishing exercise, on the creative side, there's a lot of questions you have to ask yourself. Like, if I'm going to say something bad about someone else, am I going to tell them? You know, am I going to give them some warning that I'm doing that? You don't legally have to, but many authors do. Many publishers encourage authors to do that. Am I going to change their name? Am I going to do anything else to protect them? How far in the past was the thing I'm talking about? Because that may be that time may give you a little more comfort than something that's recently happened and tempers are still fiery. You know, right before Carrie Fisher died, when I think it was her last book came out, the Princess Diarist, and that's the one in which she chronicles the affair she had with Harrison Ford. Now that happened a long time in the past, and she told him, she showed him the book. She said, I'm going to publish this and I'm just letting you know. And he didn't really respond. I mean, he probably wasn't particularly thrilled about it, but you know, it wasn't illegal. She didn't say anything that was false. She, you know, ethically gave him warning that it was coming. So, I mean, so when I write, and I've been dabbling in memoir for years, and I read a lot of it. You know, if you read Educated by Tara Westover, you know, she makes the somewhat weird decision to sort of keep everyone's names the same except the people she's nastiest to, which I think is her dad and her brother. And she was criticized for that because it's very, very easy to figure out who those people are. Like, once she's identified her family, where she lived, what the rest of her family is called, they're all on Facebook, you can find them. So it was like, that was sort of an odd choice to not name her brother and her dad, but it obviously, as a writer, meant something to her to not put their names there. Where
you wonder if she was still afraid of them?
I mean, I think, you know, I was very nosy about this whole thing because I'm so interested in these issues. And a lot of people sort of wrote testimony, like either appeared in public or put things on Facebook or whatever. And a lot of her friends and ex-boyfriends and people who had known her said, yeah, she was really scared of those folks. And that,
yeah, I believe it. That story, if anyone's interested in Memoir, we talked about it in our last meeting. Woo, what a book.
That's brilliant. I mean, I thought she did an amazing job, and there's a lot of discussion because it's so contemporary, because she's so young and she's writing about her life, but she's very young. And so it inflamed a lot of discussion about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and what's truth and what's not. And my gut feeling is, you know, she was telling her truth, that she's the youngest child. So stuff that some of her older siblings didn't see or understand, I think you can make sense of the different accounts by saying, well, different people just saw different things. She's telling her story. If one of her older brothers told the story, it would be a different story. But, you know, I don't know. That's just me reading into it. But that's the thing with memoir. It's very hard to sort of, I mean, there's like the truth, the objective facts, but then everyone sees a different part of, I mean, I honestly, I admit that I sent my memoir proposal to my agent, and like, that was one of the scariest things I've ever done because it's so personal. It's the most personal thing I've ever written. And it took me months. I told her in December I was working on it, and she said, yeah, send it along. And I sent it in April. And I just spent all of this time going through every line thinking, does this have to be here? Is this sort of just being gratuitously mean about something? And I took a lot out and I changed a lot of stuff around because, you know, it's so different to writing fiction. It's because you are talking about real people, and not that, I mean, memoir often sells on proposal, which is why I wrote a proposal. So a lot of what's in the proposal wouldn't be in the book anyway, even if it did sell. But even in a proposal, you're sort of saying to yourself, well, do I have to tell agents and editors that, you know, this law firm partner said this, or is that just gratuitous? Does that not add
Well, do
anything?
you? I mean, what's the answer? I'm really curious about that, because Fly Girl was based on an actual experience, and I may very well write a memoir about it someday. So I am curious. I mean, do you have to disclose those things?
Well, it's every fact you have to make that decision. And so the entire, I mean, think about how you structure a novel, you know, the 3-act structure. It's the same with a memoir. You're using the same toolbox. One way this has been explained to me, because I have a lot of friends who are also memoir writers, and the memoir writers all say, writing fiction is so hard, you have to make up all of this stuff in the narrative arc. And then the fiction writers all say, writing memoir is so hard because you have to figure out what to take out to make a narrative arc. Your life isn't a narrative arc. Your life is a big mess. And you have to decide what story you're telling. And that's what I find hard. So the answer to your question is, you take out all the bits that aren't part of the story you're telling. And so you have to know what the story you're telling is. You know,
well, I'll be really honest with you. One of the reasons I decided to write the first book fiction instead of memoir was because I needed to be authentic, and being authentic and telling the truth would have raised a lot of hackles. I mean, if you ever do get a chance to read it, you will see why.
Oh, I'll read it. Yeah.
But every character is inspired. They're all amalgam, but they're inspired by actual people who are, for the most part, still alive.
Right. And this is where, you know, okay, legally, fiction helps you a lot in the sense of the identifiable person aspect of the defamation. Like, it's really hard for people to sue successfully in defamation anyway. Like, so few cases in defamation are ever successful. But in fiction, you can't even often get over the identifiable person part because you're creating an amalgam. And the mistake plaintiffs make is the test isn't that they can identify themselves in your work, it's that the rest of the world can identify.
A reasonable person would be able to. So here's an interesting question. You did mention that the standard of proof for a public figure or someone, you know, who is out there, who has more of a public profile, is actual malice.
Yeah.
Is it, what is it for the regular person? What is the standard for the regular person? I've forgotten.
It's just it's very much like any other tort, like
negligence or
right. And it varies from state to state because defamation is not a federal action. That's why Trump was crazy when he was talking about how he's going to change the defamation law. The federal government has nothing to do with defamation law. That's state-based law.
Well, he didn't have any idea, I'm sure.
No, but okay, well, we won't say anything. But the point is that no one in the federal government can change the defamation law. So they vary from state to state, but it's just your basic tort. So it's like, did you do this, you know, under it's not that you owe them a duty of care like negligence, but did you publish, you know, false and misleading information about an identifiable person that would, you know, reasonably bring them into disrepute? And it's just a, you know, regular, is this an
intentional tort?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Defamation.
Defamation. And now that you mention it, it is. It's an
intentional infliction of emotional distress is in that bucket too. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think all of this is super fascinating because, like, well, for starters, the question of what is the emotional arc that you're going to convey in a memoir, because none of us has like this clear, it's just such a mess. I mean, for me anyway, people are like, oh, you should write a memoir. I'm like, I didn't even know where to start, where to finish, what the theme would be. I have so many, you know, individual arcs that I wouldn't know how to put that together. But also the question too is like, we're so worried or concerned about, well, first of all, which events were important in forming our perception of the world, because memoir is really your experience, right? It's not necessarily 100% fact. So I might have overreacted to somebody's, you know, behavior, but that was how that moment informed my life emotionally or however else in the way that it did. And whether they see it that way or not, I mean, like, do I need to be concerned about how they experience that? Or do I just get to write about my own experience of it and how it impacted, you know, my arc? Yeah. So what do you think about?
I mean, that's not at all really a legal question, because you have no legal duty to not upset someone, otherwise we'd be in court all the time. But I think that knee-jerk reaction to sort of feeling that defensiveness and the need to sort of justify what you're saying does go very much hand in hand in, you know, what is this story about? What is this, if it's a personal essay, if it's a, you know, full-fledged memoir. And I mean, some sort of things that are memoirs are kind of vignette-y. I think Educated is, honestly. I'm not sure that there's a narrative arc in Educated. I think it's a series of vignettes about her life.
And it's more, I honestly think we talked a lot about this, the difference between memoir and autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really straddles the line, and I think it tips over a little bit more to autobiography because it starts when she was a child and ends at present day. Yep. Memoir is usually a very defined time period, unless, and that is my understanding, unless you have a different understanding.
No, I mean, I don't think there's a correct or an incorrect understanding, but I do think autobiographies typically tend to be more, you know, cradle to grave or cradle to the present day, and memoir is usually more in the creative nonfiction bucket. It's usually more, I'm telling a story about, you know, my relationship with my dad or how I learned this, or, you know, so it is more it does tend to be more thematic than about the person's life. And I think once you have your theme, once you've figured out what the theme is and what the story is, I suspect, because I'm not an expert in this area, I've just taken some classes and read lots of books, that the questions like Liz is asking are less worrisome, because once you know what you're saying, then you know if the part you're telling serves that greater story or not. And then if it does, you're less worried about, oh, but what would so-and-so think if they saw it? Because it's like, no, this is an integral part of the narrative I'm creating. So
I think people have to, you know, when we did the novel versus memoir presentation, I was talking about one of my friends who wrote a book about hiking the John Muir Trail with a trail, and she wrote a book about it. It was really good. And she wrote about her trail guide, who was a colossal bitch and was really mean to her and kept leaving her behind. And she changed her name. And this is a woman she met in the small town in which she lives in. And she's like, oh my God, so-and-so found out about the book and she's so upset about it. I'm like, what did you think was going to happen?
yeah, I mean, you wear that, like, you know that, but people can be upset about whatever you write. If you're like, you have to have a thick skin. If you're an artist, you have to handle rejection, you have to handle criticism, you have to handle people being upset with you who haven't even read your book. I mean, once you put yourself out there, I mean, we know that. So it's not a legal issue though.
So does anyone else have legal discussion points that they would like to talk with Jackie about, this fabulous expert in this field, before I start drilling her with questions as a literary agent?
Sarah does, I think.
You just mentioned something that caught my interest. You said one of the options of things you could talk about were the legal aspects with marketing and posting on social media. That's something I honestly hadn't thought about. So if you could even just give me a quick rundown of what that would reference to, I would appreciate it.
Well, you know, when you do your swag and your websites and even Twitter and Facebook posts, you know, people are often copying and pasting other people's imagery, music, you know, book trailers with music and stuff. That any of that copying without, you know, permission may or may not be a fair use, but may very well be a copyright infringement. And I always used to say, yeah, but who cares? We live in a copy and paste culture and whatever. And then one of my, actually she's a client, but she was doing some work in this area. And she said, she found all these stories of like bloggers being sued for doing. So the point is, it doesn't happen often that someone sues you for cutting and pasting something in your swag or your website or your social media. But when it does happen, copyright holders, because it's a strict liability tort, and that's what I said before, there's no intent required for a copyright infringement. You just have to have done the act of the copying. No one cares if it was, you know, if you didn't know that it was, you know, that doesn't play into it. It's strict liability. You're liable just for doing the act, whatever your intent was. And a copyright holder can claim statutory damages, which are huge, you know, much higher damages than would actually be occasioned by whatever your use was. Like they could have asked you for a license and you didn't pay them a license, and that would have been like $150. No, they can get statutory damages, which might be like $25,000 or $100,000. And so it's low risk. Like it's not likely that someone's going to sue you for that stuff, but if they do, it can be, you know, very high cost. And so, you know, there's a lot of sort of arguments you can raise about, well, it was a fair use, but in order to establish whether something was a fair use or not, usually you have to go to court and ask a judge to tell you, because the American fair use doctrine isn't very clear. It does, you know, you don't know up front. It's very fluffy, and I always say floofy and vague, and there's all these 4 factors that the judge takes into account. So you don't know if it's a fair use. And particularly if you're using it for marketing and commercial purposes of your own, that's one of the fair use factors. If the copyright holder could have asked you to pay a license fee and you didn't pay it, you know, that's another one. So low risk that you'll get in trouble, but very high cost if you do. So you can then, on the other hand, think about the permissions route. And when I wrote this book, in the last chapter, when I'm talking about this stuff, you know, I do have imagery in here, because when I'm talking about, say, this is the Obama Hope poster, and I'm talking about whether or not that was a fair use or not of the Associated Press's image. And I have a couple of examples of that in the book. And then probably my uses are probably fair uses, because I'm using it in an educational book, you know, to tell people about copyright. But it's also a commercially available book, and it's not clear whether it would be a fair use or not. So of course, University of California Press says, well, you have to get permission for anyone's images you want to use. And I wanted to use the, if you remember the movie Naked Gun 33 1/3, I wanted to show the Annie Leibovitz photo of Demi Moore when she was pregnant with the naked belly on the Vogue cover, next to the Leslie Nielsen spoof for the poster of Naked Gun 33 1/3. So I asked, because I got permission for everything that's in here, and it's not that hard. You know, I paid the AP $100. Shepard Fairey, who made the Obama poster, said, yeah, you don't have to pay us anything, just use it. But when I asked Annie Leibovitz's lawyer and Paramount, well, Paramount was like, we're not even talking to you. And Annie Leibovitz's lawyer was, she's so offended if you want to do anything of hers in black and white in small scale, because it's art. We don't look at art like that. So those things are not in the book. I could not get the permission. They're not in the book. I refer to them and say, if you want to go and look at what they look like, here's a website where you can see them. But it's the same thing, because University of California Press doesn't want to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in statutory damages because we upset someone where we could have got a license. It's the same. It's really, it's mainly images, but if you use music in book trailers, if you use clips from movies and TV shows, even quotes from works that are copyrighted, you just have to be really careful.
I am so like completely in tune to this right now, because I am obviously promoting other people's work
Yes.
with the Aviatrix book review and all of my social media. And I am super careful to quote them, but you know, my hope, I mean, I'm not getting express written permission for everything that I'm doing. I do have an agreement for the interviews, at least for author interviews, to protect, you know, to protect myself for use on the variety of media that I'm using. But quoting books, quoting authors who have submitted their author profiles to me for posting on the website, I just make sure to give credit everywhere. Pictures, you know, trying to use pictures of women in aviation. I look first and foremost on the commons, right?
Yeah,
Is that,
yeah.
yeah, for copyright free, that say explicitly that whether or not that picture can be altered or not. Like, it's just, I know way more than I ever wanted to know about this stuff.
Yep.
But my hope is that there's sort of an agreement with that author whose work I'm promoting to whatever my audience ends up being in the end, that it's helping them.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not going to do anything to harm anybody's work. So, but totally thinking about that all the time. Did that help you, Sarah, with your question?
Yes, it did. And I think I'm gonna have to find, there's one video I made where I don't think I was careful with the pictures. So I'm gonna delete something from that. Thank you.
Yeah, as I say, it's low risk that anyone
Right.
will find it, but you never know.
It kind of depends on what you're doing with it too, right? Like whether.
Well, legally it doesn't, because legally it's the act of copying. It doesn't matter why you copied. It's just that you copied. So, you know, even when you say, well, I was only using it to promote their work, that's not an aspect of that. That's not a defense to copyright infringement. fair use is a defense to copyright infringement, and you could say, well, but it was just criticism, commentary. I wasn't making a commercial profit from it. So I think what you're implicitly doing is arguing fair use, but it's not an excuse to copyright infringement that you were helping someone. And actually, scholars have written about that. They've said, isn't this crazy that there's nothing in the Copyright Act that says when the chances are when you're promoting something, no one's going to be upset about it, so they're not going to sue you. But that's not a legal issue. That's just people are appreciative of what you're doing.
Jackie, is there a website where you can go to determine whether or not a quote, say from a literary work, is in the public domain?
I know it's so hard to figure out what's in the public domain. I do have this friend who's a law professor. I think she's still at Tulane. And now Elizabeth Townsend Guard. And she, for years, has been creating this. She has created it, this software called the Durationator. She got a big government grant to do it like years ago. And the idea is you plug stuff in and it tells you. And I don't know how comprehensive her database is, but she's been working on it for over 15 years. She started with music. So that's one.
Well, music, I mean, ever since, I don't know how old people are on this call, but ever since the days of Napster, the music industry, they are ruthless about anyone using lyrics, way more in my, that I've heard than like using a literary quote.
Yeah.
I wanted to use Madonna lyrics in my first book, and everyone said you can use the name of the song.
Right.
Names are not copyrightable, but you best not use the lyrics. I used a quote in book 2 that I knew was in the public domain, and I'm trying to determine whether a quote I want to use in book 3 is in the public domain, and I think it is, but how do you ever know?
Well, the other thing, I just refer you to my nerdy law professor friends. James Boyle at Duke University Law School has the Center for the Public Domain. They have a lot of information about what's in the public domain and what isn't. And you can, you can email them and they would not, but they have a lot of stuff on their website. Mm-hmm. If it's in a book, that was published before 1924, it would be in the public domain.
And it is. And it's a poem. It's a poem that was published in 1923.
Oh, well, then it's fine. Because then if it's a literary work published in the US before 1924, then you're okay.
Thank you.
Yay! That was a clear answer. Lawyers never give clear answers.
No, I know. I feel like you should send me a bill.
Yeah, sure. Anytime.
So I would love to shift into some literary agent and publishing questions, but I wanted to give everybody like a 5-minute break. So if anybody needs to take a quick break, or if the agent and publishing thing isn't your interest, then you can sign off or whatever. But is everybody good? Just one last call for any lawyer-specific legal questions. Okay. Seeing none, we will take a 5-minute break and join back at 6:11.
Okay.